Hello and welcome to the Medicine and Machine Learning Podcast. I'm your host, David, and today we have Dr. Matthew Lungren from Nuance Communications. He is the Chief Medical Information Officer at Nuance Communications, a Microsoft company. As a physician and clinical machine learning researcher, he maintains a part-time interventional radiology practice at UCSF, while also serving as adjunct faculty for other leading academic medical centers, including Stanford and Duke. Prior to joining Microsoft, Dr. Lungren led the Stanford Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine and Imaging. So thank you, Dr. Lungren, for coming on to our show today. I was wondering if you could tell us about your path and how you came to the intersection of medicine and machine learning.
Yeah, well, really appreciate the opportunity to be on, and great to finally meet you. So my career path was definitely non-traditional for sure. I started out, obviously, as most folks do, wanting to pursue medicine, and ended up getting really interested in technology along the way, right? And that's what kind of led me to interventional radiology, which is a subset, as you know, of radiology. And so being able to use images and kind of cool tech and devices to treat patients was really an exciting area for me. At least it got me going. And as part of that, though, I was sort of from a research perspective, I kept running into opportunities to say, well, can we take a step back and a broader look at things from a population health level? Are there insights that we're from radiology that we aren't considering? A lot of, as you know, population health research is, based a lot on claims codes, very, maybe I would say generalist data, not necessarily specific data. And there's a lot of untapped, information about patients that's locked up in radiology reports or surgical sort of reports, right? But that's unstructured text, which is very difficult to deal with at scale with, traditional techniques. And so that's what started to get me in about 15 years ago, starting to play around with NLP, right? To sort of extract those insights, right? And just say at a population level, do we have more normals coming from this group, or what's the distribution of disease, right? And are there ways we can target our interventions and things at a population? So that was really fun. But as part of that, I came to Stanford and took a faculty job there and recognized that this is the AI place, right? This is where it's all happening. And my very rudimentary abilities with NLP really were like accelerated for sure by coming here. And so right around 2014, that's when you started seeing computer vision really taking off, right, with ImageNet, the Microsoft research work, all the great work with ResNets and things. So getting to a place where now could we combine all the things that I'm doing at a pop level with text data? Can we throw in images? Or is there more we can do? So that's when we really started to accelerate. So that's kind of how I ended up in the space. And then to be honest with you, I practice half time at Stanford, and the other half of my time was just, researcher, running a lab and running a center there. And in that process, kind of just got a casual education over the, 8 or 10 years, working with all the brilliant folks at Stanford on ways we could work together. And I think that's what I really found what I love to do the most, right? Multidisciplinary teams, taking technology from one area, applying it to healthcare, and seeing what's possible.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't realize NLP, 15 years ago, there was already work going on, like being made on it.
Lots of NLP research over the years. Yeah, support vector machines all the way back to, I think my first paper support vector machines was maybe 2005, I want to say. Pretty crazy.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool, because I feel like it wasn't really until like the past 10 years that people really started, talking about this kind of stuff. And that's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's funny. The one thing I find, and I like to do this in some of my talks just because it's entertaining and always kind of an aha moment. But like, if you look up things that we're trying to do now, and just kind of go back as far as you can historically in the literature, you could find stuff all the way back to like the 70s, 60s sometimes, right? Where folks were, I mean, a lot of it rules based, a lot of Bayesian stuff, but still, like the things that we're trying to accomplish these are not like, oh, we're brilliant because we're coming up with this ourselves, right? It's always been something that people much more, intelligent than us, probably because they're having to do a lot of hand calculations even at some point. But you realize that it really wasn't until the convergence of compute, the convergence of obviously some of the amount of data that we have digitized that allowed these things to happen. But a lot of these things, I get, even backprop was not invented in 2012, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
like 1980s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And convolutional neural network, none of these things are like brand new. Obviously, some of
That's
the newer
true.
things like transformers are, but you get the point, right? Like a lot of this stuff is just great ideas, really awesome computer science innovation, but not the compute or the data to really make it so that you can demonstrate what it can do, right? And that's where,
Mhm.
again, I really turn to, the pioneering work by Feifei in terms of getting enough data into a place where researchers around the world can all collaborate and actually show what the power of these things really is.
That's inspiring. That's wow. So before medical school, did you know that you were did you have like a coding background or like a technical background?
Nope, not at all. I was an English major.
No way.
Yeah, definitely not technical at all. In fact, really just I love reading. I love literature. I love arts, and so that was really my core area. But I think that coming out of that, what I've noticed and the similarities, at least for me personally, obviously not this may not apply to everyone, but there's something incredibly elegant about the idea of taking a model that can essentially be a blank sheet of paper, just like a blank sheet of paper for a novel, and you can put your ideas into that and generate something that's meaningful to the world in some way. And I think that the very creative endeavor that I think particularly recently computer science is sort of heading in that direction. I just that's what really gets me out of bed too. I just love the idea that you can come up with a creative, elegant solution with this tool to do something powerful for society. And again, I would argue that there's a lot of allegories in literature with that same kind of mentality. Where can we write something that inspires someone? Can we write something that moves the needle politically, or from fiction or poetry, all those kinds of things? But it's still the same kind of a medium, right? It's a tool to achieve those things. So anyway, that's how I see it in my brain, although that
That's
might
a
be
beautiful thought.
unconventional, but yeah.
I kind of want to talk more about that. That's a beautiful thought. First, I want to ask, what kind of do you have a favorite kind of literature or a favorite author?
I mean, I've always been just kind of a postmodern guy, just because obviously it's much more in vogue now, but back in the 90s, I read a lot of postmodern stuff.
How would you
And
define postmodern? What does
postmodern
postmodern
is
mean to you?
well, it's like short fiction, basically the kind of thing that's like not adhering to any specific rules. Like it's not like classical, or the language can be much more free. Like Cummings as the poet doesn't capitalize things, right? That kind of stuff,
Mhm.
right? And just being able to sort of take language and maybe play with it a little bit, but in a sort of a context of um, not adhering to just very common, well-worn, archetypes and things. That for me though, like it sounds kind of weird, but I definitely I like science fiction. As part of that, maybe as an offshoot, but that really isn't my core area. Uh, I really enjoy short fiction. And yeah, still subscribe to Harper's after 30 years, and yeah.
Where would Lolita fall on that? Is that before postmodern? You know what I mean? Is postmodern like after Lolita?
I actually don't know. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but probably, yeah, probably.
Like David Foster Wallace?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. He's a classic example, right? Infinite Jest, one of the most challenging books. But Gravity's Rainbow, of course, is the one that we all like to brag about that we read. But we all really understand it? Hard to say.
Oh
Yeah,
no, yeah, I couldn't get through
yeah.
it. Here's a sorry, one more literature related question. I'm curious, what do you think is uh, the next great American novel?
It'll probably be written by GPT.
That's funny. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a crazy thought.
Yeah, this is where I really see the two parts of what I'm passionate about really converging in an exciting way, right? As you've probably seen with ChatGPT, and then obviously all the accelerations that have been going on with large language models. That to me is really just a phenomenal opportunity to, again, hopefully for on the side of good, to really superpower people that have maybe a voice that they can't express well,
Yeah.
maybe an idea that they can't put the pieces together just like a great writer might be able to, and this gives them that opportunity to do that. I think this is an accelerant, I think, for more voices around the world being
Wow.
expressed. Yeah.
What do you think is the last piece of great American literature written without the aid of GPT or
This is super subjective. I mean, I think the last book that I probably I couldn't put down was probably Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I thought that was just like, holy cow. Like, just the terse writing, the obviously very bleak book, but still
I'm gonna write that down.
one of those ones I really enjoy. Yeah, I mean, they eventually made a movie out of it, but it's definitely no way to compare to the writing in that. Yeah, no, but literature is just as subjective as anything else. But I think you could probably also pin down, anyone on their favorite, what's your favorite technique? What's your favorite optimizer? How do you design your? It's the same kind of a thing, I think.
Have you played around with GPT-3 in writing?
Yeah, I play around with ChatGPT quite a bit. I've used it recently quite a bit to summarize scientific literature, and then to sort of be like almost like a sidecar for hey, what do they mean when they say this, or how would you design this? You put in the method section, you can say how would you design an experiment to do this with LSTMs instead, or right, and it sort of, again, not always 100% accurate, and as you know, has some weaknesses in terms of finding references, which is unfortunate, but I think that's a solvable problem.
Yeah.
But really can kind of spur new ideas, or even just say, put in the discussion, say, what are some experiments that you would do to build on this work, etc. It's pretty fun, and that's obviously very academically focused. I think just from a creative perspective, I don't write creatively really, but I've seen a lot of work online about folks that have just taken in all kinds of directions. And again, this is the kind of thing where, even if my grandparents are talking about ChatGPT, this has really been a kind of a sea change moment, right? This is like the World Wide Web or the first iPhone. I really think that this is going to be the technology that changes the world.
I've personally played around with ChatGPT, and I do enjoy creative writing. And I've put in some of my writing in there and seeing what it spits out. And I'll be honest, it was a little terrifying because it
Yeah, well,
was some
you
good
can ask it
stuff.
to write it. You can ask it to write it in any like format you want. Like write it as a children's book, write it as a Stephen King novel, write it as a whatever. It'll do it for you.
Yeah, it was terrifying how good the stuff that it spat back out at me. I was like, oh my goodness. Do you ever are you ever afraid, or do you feel fear from the power that we see in in this technology?
I don't know. I don't know if I've had that emotion. I've definitely had a kind of a very like, I've had a feeling like it's like I'm seeing something big. I mean, my generation was, I'm in this weird Gen X, like, which is sort of weird because, I grew up with landlines and right fax machines and like even writing before, a typewriter, right? And then records
Wow.
and things, and then kind of moved. And then my generation, right, we just every 4 or 5 years we'd have some new thing, right? The mobile phone, the internet, right, email, like all these things kind of came up. And so it does feel a little bit to me like that, right? When I first saw the World Wide Web, AOL, you got a disc in the mail, right?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah. I remember that.
Steve Jobs first held up the iPhone, like that. Those moments to me, I think, have a lot of similarity to how we'll look back at there's a pretty recent but famous, I think, picture of Satya Nadella with Sam Altman, and that I think is going to be just as iconic as we look back in the next 4 or 5 years as some of those other things that are burned in our memories about how technology has really just changed our lives.
Mm. And that's a perfect segue. Speaking of Satya Nadella, I feel like we should talk about your work at Nuance. And I was wondering, could you tell us about Nuance and its partnership with Microsoft, or is it a partnership or merger? Kind of how would you describe it to a medical student?
Oh yeah, no. So they were partners for quite a while. They were so Nuance Communication. Just for those who aren't familiar, it's the fundamental core technology is voice to text, right? Something called Dragon, that's used by 80% of physicians in the country, and also have a solution that's more general for most other types of physicians. But then they also have an entire arm that's related to medical imaging. And again, the vast majority of people, at least in the US, use their technology to dictate reports that are used, right, for clinical care. And as the AI sort of, kind of boom kind of kicked off, I want to say in 2017, really in earnest, 2018, a lot of the companies needed a way to deploy the solutions that they've been developing. And Nuance kind of saw this as an opportunity because they're already integrated into health systems across the country, to say, well, we can provide that integration, that last mile piece, which is obviously one of the hardest things to solve. We can all come up with an algorithm. We might even be able to get it FDA approved. How are you going to get it in the hands of clinicians, right? That's a very difficult problem that's often underestimated by, pretty much anyone you talk with. And so Nuance, because they're in that last mile, represents, at least for me, but then also obviously for Microsoft, the opportunity to say, are there tools and platforms that we can build that accelerate the ecosystem, change the infrastructure for folks doing digital transformation, like a health system who still uses fax machines and pagers? Can we move it into ideally the cloud environment where we can iterate and deploy it much more quickly and get these innovations out into the world? And so they eventually, Microsoft acquired Nuance, which I believe was closed last spring. And I think that really is going to be, for me, the full end-to-end story, right? Going from kind of, we talked about at the beginning, kind of a blank slate. You have cloud resources, you have storage, you have compute, you have a ton of tools and services. And now you have an integration environment that sort of closes that development to deployment gap that you're seeing, right? There's 300 plus FDA cleared AI solutions out in the world. 2% of clinicians have touched one of those. Wow, and it's not because they don't work. That's not the reason. There's just so much infrastructure that needs to be sort of dealt with before you can get it into the world. So that's why I chose this, path. I think for me, I loved academics. I still practice, but sort of the things that I was frustrated about trying to run clinical trials and things with things we built in our lab is just like, oh man, it took us 6 months to build something we thought was really cool and worked extremely well. And then it took us 18 months plus to get into one health system, right? So like, wow. How do I, like, and that frustration I think is felt by everyone in the field to some extent. And so how do we get to a place where the people are talking with each other, they understand each other's pain points, their point of view, the technology, et cetera? I felt like maybe this is a time for me to make a change, to learn at the same time, but also to really try to break open this ecosystem.
That's super cool. I personally have used Dragon, and I think it's an incredible technology. And I'm sure many of our listeners have used it. I was wondering, what did Dragon come first, and then Nuance? Is that how Nuance grew, or did Nuance have other things, and then they made Dragon, and that really took off?
It's a great question. My understanding, and again, this company is well predates my being here, but I believe it was the voice to text technology that really got them into the healthcare space. But they also, right, that voice to text is also used in other industries. It's not just healthcare, right? But that's the predominant area. And I think and this is where the famous Amazon saying that there's no compression in algorithm for experience. It's really that experience, right? It's like working through growing up with healthcare, all the infrastructure that they're accustomed to now dealing with, having that experience of being on the ground, those relationships, understanding that pain of the heterogeneous implementations, working with EHR vendors and working with PACS vendors, et cetera. All that stuff that like makes your eyes cross thinking about, that's what they're good at, right? So they're really good at the stuff that is incredibly hard, and there's no like, oh, I'm just gonna wipe the slate clean and start over. That's just not a thing in healthcare, right? So, so we really do have to tangle with that infrastructure in order to get technology into the hands of docs. So before AI, right, it was, how do I get voice to text done? So docs are able to save time and get through their day and see more patients, et cetera. Well, getting that into clinics was a multi-year, probably even more decade-long process. But now that that's kind of been an institutional knowledge / experience, then as new technologies come online, it's more, it's a good avenue to deliver that.
Wow, that is, I hadn't thought about how with implementation, that makes a lot of sense.
It's really tough.
Wow. It's like you guys are like this, like an enzyme, that's like helping with that implementation, lowering that activation energy.
It's a good way to think of it, actually. Yeah.
And I was wondering, there's other like solutions I saw on the website. There's like other nuanced solutions. I was wondering, do you have like a favorite one, like a favorite new thing?
Um, you know, I guess I spend a lot more of my time on data science and strategy between the two orgs, but so I'm not as much in the product space, but when I think about which of the products would be best suited for this data science innovation or this platform or tool or service or whatever, I think that the precision imaging network, which is the ability to drop off, the resources needed for a hospital system to run inference with these technologies and put it into existing workflows, so you don't have to click on four other things on your desktop in order to get to some model to provide that insight. I think that's the thing that I am most excited about spending a lot of time with. The other thing is, again, this will be a surprise maybe to some people who aren't familiar with healthcare, but if you wanted a copy of your medical imaging test from hospital A because you're being seen at hospital B, today, even in 2022, almost 2023, you still have to get a disc most of the time burned and then hand carry it over. It's crazy, or mailed over. And
Yeah.
that it's insane for people to think about this digital world we have. And so, but that's changing, right? And so one of the products they have is PowerShare, which allows healthcare systems to easily exchange your medical imaging so that when you're at hospital B, they can query hospital A and pull those studies. You don't have to repeat studies like that. And again, really powerful sort of network opportunity there from my perspective. Again, going back to the idea of population health, can we learn something about the imaging studies that are being moved around the country? Is there insight there that we may not have had before because we were all hand carrying discs around and trying to figure out how to get imaging studies from different places?
Yeah, I've seen people carry around the CDs, and it's kind of silly that most of our computers, our laptops, don't even have CD-ROM. They don't even read CDs anymore.
It's a Well, no, it's literally a problem. In fact, in my practice now, like I'll have a patient come and see me, and they'll bring their disc, and I literally don't even know how I can open it without having to go to a special computer somewhere off in the basement, right? Because it gets to your point, even if they make a link available, it's a whole thing to like log in to like get it all set up, and so again, trying to solve some of those pain points. It's all about just breaking down some of the silos of infrastructure that we've built in healthcare for a purpose, right? I mean, you really don't want to have secure data. You don't want it to be, hackable, et cetera. That's kind of the whole game. But at the same time, that approach has been maybe taken to the extreme to some extent, right? So then to unlock that is difficult, and that's part of that whole. Are we going to get to a digital transformation? My bet, obviously, with my career, even is that the answer is going to be yes. That in 5 to 10 years, healthcare systems will not own data centers. They will not try to deal with managing their own servers. That'll probably use the cloud, right? And
Yeah.
I think as the economics start to be sort of turning into their favor, you still need to understand cloud, how cloud is used, all those things, and there's a big gap in knowledge between a traditional healthcare system and then what the other industries are doing in the cloud, right? And how do you bring those together? That's kind of part of what I do.
Mm. Oh, I have many questions I want to ask. One question I wanted to ask, related, with healthcare systems, as medical students or people going into medicine, doctors, how much code do you think they should know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that my answers evolved a little bit over the last 10 years. I think, when I was first starting out, even I took classes in Python and Java and things, and not that I was doing it so that I could code anything. It was really just so that I could work more effectively with students and take courses in AI that required, the ability to code, right? You have to go through exercises and learn the principles as you go. And that was really valuable. However, I think over the last 2 or 3 years, especially, I think that the reliance on really hardcore traditional coding skills, at least from a medical perspective, I find that it's really not very useful. In fact, one of the reasons for that is that there are now plenty of educational research. I used to teach a course at Stanford too on this, which is if you understand the fundamentals, the principles, even at a decently high level, you can be incredibly effective as a physician to understand what are the best ways I can solve problem X using whether it's machine learning or just with traditional programming, right? How can I achieve that aim? And then knowing when I'm using those systems, why it might not work and when to trust it, when not to, right? That's important. And I think closing that gap is going to be a lot easier, particularly as number one, I think that there's more, folks in tech that are starting to learn more about healthcare and understand that relationship. But at the same time, clinicians learning about technology, I think as that kind of converges, those knowledge bases, I think you'll always need a multidisciplinary team. I don't care if you're the greatest coder in the world and you happen to be a physician. As I've said, I think there's still people out there that would be able to do that coding quite a bit better.
Yeah.
But the other thing I like to say is, like, and one of the things I did a lot in my career was try to provide access to medical data to researchers around the world, because that's really the critical bottleneck, right? Is like, you may be awesome, you may have some great techniques, you don't really have any medical data to apply it to see if it works. And so once I started to see the ability to release that data as accelerating the broader ecosystem, what I realized was that the crowd almost always wins, right? These challenges, you find that it's not a big tech company sometimes, right? It's a lot of times it's just a very talented person. Yeah, like they learn how to code from Andrew's course, and
Yeah.
they really want to do something in healthcare, and they took on a Kaggle challenge or an RSNA challenge, or they took some data and they reproduced. It's really remarkable. And so to me, like, the hardest knowledge to acquire is clinical knowledge, like clinical practice knowledge. You can't go on YouTube and take an open, MOOC on, right? You know that, right? And
Yeah.
even if you try to read every medical textbook, there's something to the actual practice of medicine that's very, very difficult to attain that knowledge. And I think people underappreciate both the medical education that we have, which is phenomenal in the US particularly, and then the number of hours that you as an intelligent human have spent thinking and doing those things. It's insane. Like, it's way more than a full-time job, right? It's like 2 or 3 full-time jobs, as you well know. And as you go through residency and then, become an attending, that doesn't really slow down. So you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of hours to take someone from a day one of med school all the way to day 5 of their, practice. And then that's a very difficult knowledge base to acquire without going through that process. So I look at that as being kind of the core, obviously from my perspective, and then learning enough about the other, technologies in order to bring my core knowledge into that space and be effective.
I like that a lot. That's very, very inspiring.
Well, listen, and if you really want to code yourself, I direct people to, GitHub Copilot. There's plenty of Khan Academy. There's all kinds of places you can learn, Andrew's course, others, where you can get up to speed enough to be able to start playing around. But at the end of the day, as things start to accelerate, again, going back to the large language model concept, I think there's going to be a lot of knowledge-based skill sets that will be either accelerated or potentially even displaced to some extent by the use of these technologies.
I'm curious, what is a typical day like in your job as Chief Medical Information Officer?
Well, it's a busy time, I think. So my oftentimes in the mornings it's a lot of meetings, right? Obviously, my mornings are spent with Microsoft research, either in Cambridge or even all the way as far as India, kind of working through some of the very early incubation things, right? What's happening, what are the newest techniques, et cetera. And then as my day progresses, the US wakes up, and so I'm sort of moving from East Coast to West Coast, right? And so my day ends usually in Pacific time with the headquarters of Microsoft and others, and sort of dealing with, what are the products, what are the cloud-based services, et cetera. And in the middle there is Nuance, where there are very much an East Coast-based company based out of Boston. And there, of course, it's really about the now. It's like Horizon 1, like tomorrow stuff. And so my days are kind of bookended with like 5 years from now stuff, and even 10 years from now stuff. And in the middle is like now. And I think that's why I love my job, because it's like, you get to think about what the possibilities are. You get to be creative and think about that. But then there's still that reality of like, I don't just want to think about cool ideas and do POCs. I want to actually see things actually in the real world. And so I get a little bit of taste of both by doing that.
That's super cool. So when do you start your day then? If it's if you're meeting with teams
Yeah,
from
well,
remote?
I'd like to shift it a little bit more, but I'm typically first meeting somewhere in the 6:30 to 7 range. I mean, it's very similar. My OR schedule used to be like
Oh
obviously
yeah.
for you got to be there early. But typically my day will kind of trail off around 4 or 5, which is nice, and then you'll have the occasional evening, right? But again, it's not like I guess I've been in administrative kind of roles before where every meeting's a burden and you're like, this is, I hate meetings, etc. I totally understand that sentiment. I feel like I'm in this really strange, like alternative universe where the meetings are actually pretty fun. Everyone I work with is awesome. I really do enjoy this role, and so the meetings are actually energizing to me. So it doesn't feel like, oh man, I have to do X Y Z. It's more like I can't believe I get to do X Y Z,
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
it's really been a shift in mindset, especially as you compare it with, again, a lot of the administrative things that all of us physicians like to complain about that we deal with, which is where we really just want to be operating or we really just want to be taking care of patients and we don't want to be going to a committee meeting on who's covering the call shift for the holidays, right? That kind of stuff,
That's
right?
funny.
Those are the kind of things that drain your energy. I don't have too many of those types of interactions, which has really been great.
Do you have any advice for medical students who are interested in a non-traditional career path?
Yeah, I think in general, um, well, again, starting from a core medical sort of foundation, and then making sure that you put your like don't I guess focus on that, because you'll only get one chance as you're going through medical, as you're going through residency, to learn as much as you physically can, as much as you can tolerate, and that's really the foundation you're building forever. Now, when you have that foundation, the sky's the limit. Academics, private practice, industry, startups, whatever you feel. And again, none of those are mutually exclusive. And I was in the same sort of trap too, where I was just like, okay, well, I need to choose between what special I'm going to do, and then I have to choose academics or private practice, and that's it. Like that's my career. Like there's no right. There's always the odd folks that go into like whatever, maybe they go consulting or else. But generally speaking, those are the choices. And I think now more than ever, whatever interests you, right? And I think people that are truly interested in something will find that they're spending their nights and weekends learning the code, maybe like you're doing, or learning more about AI, or learning more about XYZ, maybe device manufacturing or robotics or something else. There's always a need for almost any technology or any innovation in healthcare, and then there needs to be someone who understands healthcare to get it there. And so that space between healthcare and field X is always a place where you could spend your time, whether it's the beginning of your career, mid, and whatever. And I think that should be the message that hopefully folks take away. What you're like, why am I studying for step one? Why do I have to do this stupid shelf exam? Like, it's because it just, think of it as just, it's a stepping stone. You're laying a brick foundation for being able to be anything you want to be in the future.
Wow. I just took step two, and it almost does kind of feel like you're like developing as an enzyme. You know what I mean? You're like developing the skill sets so that you can kind of participate in the greater sphere of medicine, and kind of like you said, you have a dream and then you go after it.
Some of it's like hazing, probably too. I think
It's
is probably fair to say. We always say all the these work hours and all this other stuff, but obviously there's a balance, right, to be struck. But yeah, but believe it or not, so there'll be a neuron in your brain that you studied for step two for, and you'll eventually bump into a clinical situation. You're like, I know that, right? And it's like it's a really like, or at least you know how to look it up and be
yeah.
able to judge it for yourself. So yeah, it feels kind of, I don't know, maybe excessive. It ends up, at least from my perspective, being useful.
Mm. Oh, and for our listeners, you still currently practice, right?
Yeah.
Wow. How do you balance practicing and working for a major company?
Well, I mean, I think it was only possible, at least personally, because I had practiced for almost 10 years already, right? And then obviously added the training, that's almost 15 years. So like definitely had the muscle memory and some of that, right? And a lot of the procedures and the operations and the things that I'm doing are, by tens and tens of thousands of, repetitive, sort of types of things in healthcare. Um, uh, and I think that allows me to have, again, talking about foundations, a foundation of a clinical practice to be able to say, and I enjoy it too, but something to say, I can do this still at an incredibly high level because I've had 10 years of doing that. I think had I jumped out after 1 year or after residency or even after med school, I think my ability to be flexible in that way would have obviously been diminished significantly. And I think for me, again, it reminds me, it's like stepping through the looking glass every time. Every time I go back into clinical practice as part of my day, I realize that, like, again, putting aside some of the emotional attachments, which is just like, man, there's a lot of suffering that we need to continue to apply our talents to fix. But then there's also this infrastructure thing that just keeps hitting you over the head. EMRs can be frustrating, workflows can be frustrating, lack of good technology is frustrating. And you're like, I see what the future is in part of my week, and then the other part of my week, I see what the reality is. And that's a really good, like, it's
cool.
it's a gut check, right? And you talking to other physicians and realizing, like, am I even solving the problems that physicians need to be solved, right? You'll find there's all kinds of cool startups out there. Why aren't they getting traction? Sometimes it's infrastructure, but also sometimes it's because they're not solving something that clinicians really need. And so I think having that grounding is really important.
That's awesome. You get both perspectives.
Well, sometimes it's awesome. Sometimes it's very stressful, and it keeps me very busy. I would say that 20 to 40% is probably the right range of the mix, right? For those in academics, it's a very easy equation to sort of work out. I'm finding it to be really, and again, keeping a little toe in academics as well, still kind of thinking about publishing and stuff. I like doing all those things. I will say that will there ever be a time when I have to make a decision and start going one direction? Maybe that's something that I'm still struggling with too, to be honest with you. But right now, I really just love the mix, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing.
When you said 20-40, is it like 20-40% clinical, and then, or yeah, what do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously you can take whatever percentage you want. You think 10% is a half a day, and so you just consider those blocks and see how you can fit them into schedules. I think, again, not that this is was intentional, but it just, when I made some of these career changes, it just happened to be in a time when there's been, obviously, between the pandemic and then just massive workforce shortages, let's be honest, across specialties. I mean, physicians are both retiring and checking out of healthcare at a high rate, and not to mention all the other healthcare staff. And so we are heading towards a pretty, even from my perspective, a pretty difficult time ahead, I think, for healthcare and our, patients getting access to healthcare, et cetera. And so with that, I think there's a lot more flexibility in healthcare systems being willing to work with physicians about 2 days a week, 1 day a week, et cetera, just to be able to continue to provide care to patients. And again, if you're in a very subspecialized area, it's even more important. And so, yeah, I don't know, would this have been possible, 10, 20 years ago? I don't know, but certainly right now, with the way that the job market is, the way that sort of the physician shortfall is, this is a perfect time to take an opportunity, I think, take some autonomy as a physician and say, here's what I'm willing to trade my time for. Here's what I want to work on.
Got it. I did kind of want to take a step back and ask a more basic question that I was meaning to ask sooner. But I was wondering if you could describe, kind of to a medical student, like, what you do at Nuance. Like, kind of like, I know you're saying about population level data, but yeah, like, how would you describe in your own words?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is, you sort of looking at the technology that we currently have in the world, and finding things that are coming down the line, whether it's computer science related, whether it's just literally just cloud technology type things, and how do I apply those to make those products that people use all day better. That's one thing I do. The other thing is sort of saying, this is a disruptive force coming down the line. How will this impact from a strategic perspective healthcare, and then of course by extension our business or the things that we are building, and that is a ton of fun too. So it's really, again, it's like this straddling of you know core innovation with again real world products, and making those things kind of work together in an environment, as that's so fast paced. Every 3 months there's a brand new innovation or brand new solution that's FDA cleared. So it's very fast paced, very exciting time.
That's awesome. I feel like you truly, have the power to change medicine.
Well, I don't know about me, but at least I'm a part of it. I can say I'm a tiny, 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 tiny piece of the puzzle. Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you're really excited about in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, well, without question, it's large language model. I mean, there's no. Again, I emphasized it earlier too, but there's really no technology. Even if you took all the AI advancements and all the things that we've talked about up until now, nothing's going to hold the candle to what we're going to see in the next 5 years with regard to how large language models will impact the practice of medicine for sure, and a lot of other industries.
What do you mean by large language models? Is that like
So,
video
like your Chat GPT is a good example. For those in the audience who haven't had a chance to play with it, the work from OpenAI, obviously a large technology companies have their own version of this, but obviously just a massive, typically transformer based model trained on billions, if not trillions, of tokens, typically straight from literature and whatever, the internet, et cetera. But that's a convergence of compute, architecture, and data that is the spark that we've all been sort of expecting, and now I think it's happening and right before our eyes, and it's going to be very difficult, honestly, to keep up, no matter where you're sitting, whether you're practicing in rural Oklahoma or you're practicing in New York City. The things that are going to be coming down the line, both from the consumer side, your patients, they won't be no longer be like Googling things. They'll be interrogating a large language model for the things that they are worried about, and they're going to come to you with all kinds of stuff, just from that perspective. But then also, what are the things that this technology, what things can it actually really make better for your life as a clinician? Think about things like note writing and composing letters for prior authorization, or summarizing patient charts, et cetera. Like all of these things, even just medical knowledge, like where should I refer this patient with this series of labs and my suspected diagnosis. All of these things are going to be coming into our hands way faster than we think. And if we aren't thinking about it, aren't ready for it, if we aren't preparing ourselves, at least as a workforce, with basic AI literacy, is my kind of soapbox, I think we're going to be missing out on some things that will really help, obviously, our practice, but certainly our patients.
What are your thoughts on generative AI, like Stable Diffusion? Do you think that's going to affect medicine as well?
I
Or
do.
how do you see it affecting it?
No, absolutely. I mean, obviously, coming from an imaging heavy specialty, again, going back to the idea of the bottleneck of access to useful data. Now imagine I can augment my model with rare cases, or I could, if my model's underperforming in a certain population or segment, can I augment that with images that are sufficiently good that they can be used for a clinically trained model? That's still a somewhat open question, but from some of the early work I've seen, you saw some maybe with the work out of Stanford on this, I think we're going to have a similar explosion in potential for access to useful imaging data that actually can lead to something that can be used in the clinic. So 100%, it's obviously a lot more difficult to train a good generative model with enough data again, but once that, I think we can get close to that space, huge potential for worldwide for medical imaging technologies.
Yeah. One of our closing questions, how has mentorship shaped your path?
Oh man, I haven't done anything without having at least 4 or 5 people that I work with routinely. I find myself constantly asking questions of people that have been down certain roads before, sometimes people outside of my area, to get their perspective, especially for big decisions like career things, for obviously everything from grant writing to how do I take care of this patient, your experience with that. all the time, I think. And that's what's really cool, I think, about the medical culture that we built in general, as I'm sure you've recognized from med school. You can call up your pathology professor and ask a question, and these people are your network forever. And leveraging that, I think, is a superpower. Leveraging the contacts and the mentors that you've kind of run into along the way over the course of your career, getting completely different perspectives. Maybe it's advice that you didn't want to hear, the hard to hear stuff. That's maybe the most valuable stuff. So yeah, no, I can't say enough about how much I benefited from that. I've tried to pay it back as best as I can, whether it's, am I a good example? Maybe I'm a bad example. I don't know, but whatever it is, I hope that I can give that insight back to those kind of coming up right now. And, like I always say, if I had to go to med school now, I probably wouldn't get in, because the current generation is way smarter than I was. And I'm constantly impressed by the next generation coming up behind me.
Dang. Last question, Dr. Lungren. I was wondering, what advice would you give to yourself at your med school graduation? Like right when you're graduating.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's always easy to look back and paint a very clear narrative of how things happened. But in reality, if you really sit down and face yourself and think about it, it was a lot of uncertainty. I think the things that I would tell myself to just maybe chill out a little bit about some of those big milestones, like step one, which residency am I going to get into, worrying about like the rankings of XYZ, like all that stuff. It's easy for folks to say they always told me it doesn't matter, but I never believed them, and I still took it too seriously. I think recognizing that, enjoying the journey and learning as much as humanly possible, even in spots that you don't think are going to apply to your practice or life. That's what I would tell myself to do. Just, focus on the learning and the experience, and everything else will fall into place.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lungren. That's beautiful. That's inspiring.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to chat with you. And again, congrats on all the great work you're doing. I'm looking forward to following your career too and seeing where you end up.
Oh, thank you.